Hello, everyone, and welcome to Critical Thinking Through English Composition. This is part two of my makeup lecture for May the 29th, 2025, and I hope to do three things in this lecture. First, I hope to give a good real-life example of how you can apply certain concepts that I've talked about in this class in real life. I'd like to give a case study of a real situation where a person was giving a presentation and was asked a very difficult question during a Q&A, and the two people had a conversation. These two people had a very strong disagreement about a very controversial issue, and I think you'll see that the way it was handled showed that with proper preparation, you can have a constructive dialogue with someone, even if you have the strongest of disagreements. After that, I'd like to do a quick review of the key concepts that we've looked at so far in this course. Hopefully this review will give you an idea of how far we have come since week one and all of the different ideas that we've looked at over the last 13 or 14 weeks and how they can give you a conceptual framework for looking at arguments and also creating as well as responding to different claims in real life. Finally, I would like to give you all of the details that you would need in order to begin preparing for our final class debate activity, which will be coming the week after next. So this Thursday, or not, sorry, next week, Tuesday is the election, and then Thursday we have the in-class preparation. It'll be the week after that when we have our final debate activity, both on Tuesday and also Thursday. Then I'll conclude our lecture with a short preview of the final exam, which, if I recall correctly, is scheduled for June the 19th. Okay, so I'd like to start off today's lecture by showing you how some of the concepts that I've discussed with you in the course can be used in a real life situation, especially between two people that have a very strong disagreement about an issue that they both feel very passionate about. I'd like to give a little bit of background to this before I begin. This incident involved Dr. Gabor Mate, who is a Canadian-Hungarian physician of Jewish descent. When he was presenting at the premier trauma therapy conference in California, Dr. Mate was asked by a member of the audience about the October 7th attack on Israel and how someone could have compassion for those involved in the attack. As I recall, in this dialogue, the person said, I think the presentation had made the point. Dr. Mate's presentation had been trying to make the point that every human being is worthy of compassion. And the person in the audience wanted, I guess, to give a very extreme example of a group of people they thought were not worthy of compassion. So that's a little bit of the background to the issue. I was at the time reading this book here, which I highly recommend. It's called The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. It's the latest book by Dr. Gabor Mate, and I think he's quite not only an astute thinker, but also a very talented public speaker as well. So I'll also provide a link to the original video a little bit later in my lecture. So that's the background. So Dr. Mate is giving a presentation, and during the Q&A, a woman in the audience asks him about the October 7th attack and describes what they believe happened and asks how it is possible to have compassion for those who are involved in the attack. Now, what we have here is, I think, a very clear problem with the word compassion. here meaning a strong feeling of sympathy and sadness for the suffering or bad luck of others, and a wish to help them. In particular, the feeling of a strong sense of sympathy or sadness for the suffering of others. The person here in the Q&A is saying that the people involved in the October 7th attack do not deserve any feeling of compassion. And after watching the video a couple of times, I made a few notes because I wanted to show how this person was making an argument as a clear set of premises and also a conclusion. Obviously, when the speaker was talking with Dr. Gabor Mate, they were not expressing it in as clear terms as I'm about to show you. But as I mentioned in an earlier class, when you hear an argument, especially one that is being given live or without a lot of prior preparation, sometimes the premises and conclusions can kind of be mixed in together. They might not be given in a very effective order. But if you listen to the person, and especially if you have the chance to listen more than once, there is a clear argument that is being made. So I'll just go through what I believe to be that person's argument. And I've tried to word the argument as clearly and concisely as possible. So the first premise that the person gives is on October the 7th, 2023, there was a Hamas-led attack in Israel on the civilian population. First premise, factual event. The second premise is young children were murdered, sometimes even put in ovens. Premise 3, many people were killed in their homes. Premise 4, countless women were sexually assaulted. Premise 5, this behavior was not just brutal, it was so inhumane, it can be described as inhuman. Actually, the attackers were behaving like animals, not human beings. This brings the speaker to their conclusion, which is, since the people involved in the attack on October 7th committed such horrible crimes against humanity, they are not deserving of compassion. Once again, this is not the exact wording of the speaker. If you're interested in the exact wording and how the person formulated their argument, I do have a link in, I think, either the next slide or 2 or 3 slides later in this lecture. But I believe this is probably the most logical, most concise way of formulating their argument. After listening to that person speak, Dr. Gabor Mate then responded. But I was thinking as I watched the video, this really does show the difficulty of conversation with someone that you might have the strongest of disagreements with. Because it's very hard to have a conversation with somebody if you cannot agree on even basic premises. If two people cannot agree on even the basic facts of a situation, it can be very hard to move forward in any kind of constructive dialogue. In particular, if a person bases their argument off of a series of premises, but several of those premises are not accepted by the other person, that creates a great barrier to communication. How can you have a conversation with someone who bases their argument on premises that you don't believe are reliable? Remember, one of the first rules that we looked at in this course is start with reliable premises. And if two people cannot agree on a set of reliable premises, that can cause conversation to break down. This issue of fake news and polarized opinions in society also comes to the fore, because when people disagree on the basic facts of a situation, once again, one person can say, I have this set of facts, and another person might say, well, I have alternative facts, to quote a phrase. And this can also be a great barrier to constructive communication in the modern world. It actually made me wonder whether, in some cases, an honest, constructive conversation is actually possible in some cases. So, what Dr. Gabor did after listening to the woman speak during the Q&A, he responds to her and they do have a conversation for a few minutes. And I have to say, if you watch the video, as soon as the woman begins talking about the October 7th attack in Israel, you can feel the mood of the audience suddenly become incredibly uncomfortable because nobody knows what is going to happen. And this has obviously created an incident in the making. Nobody knows, oh, what's going to happen here? Is there going to be a big fight? And the way Dr. Gabor approached the situation was first to acknowledge the person's point of view, and then tried to describe some common ground, try to decide and understand what premises that they both do accept. Dr. Gabor then tries to identify the points of disagreement, maintain focus on the issue rather than get lost in a tangent or an unrelated piece of information. He also tries to show empathy, which is something that unfortunately is lost in many instances in modern discourse. Not only accepting certain information, but showing an understanding of how the other side feels when there's a disagreement. Dr. Gabor Mate also tries to provide evidence and focus on understanding, and he finishes with an analogy, which I think has some very relevant similarities. I will let you judge for yourself. Now, each of these aspects to Dr. Gabor's approach, I would like to look at one by one with an actual example from the conversation that he has with the woman in the audience during the Q&A. But first, I'd like to point out a little fallacy here. Considering how we did logical fallacies just a little while ago, I think if I see a fallacy in a video such as this, it's important that I point it out. So there's a part in the video where the woman in the audience responds to Dr. Mate and says, so humans can murder and rape and maim and cut the breasts off women, and that's okay. She says this in response to something that Dr. Mate says. And I'd just like to point out, this is a very good example of someone in a real situation using the straw man argument. Remember, the straw man argument is when you show a distorted or inaccurate misrepresentation of a person's argument. So then you wind up arguing against not the argument that the person is actually making, but a distorted version thereof. And it's important to note that Dr. Mate does not excuse the brutality of the October 7th attacks in his response. He acknowledges how terrible those attacks were, but he wants to make a point that you have to see this attack as part of a problem with a very long, tragic, and complicated history, not a single incident out of context. And I've put the link here to the original video. If you'd like to go on Cyber Campus, get the PPT and then click on the link, by all means do. It's a really interesting video to watch. So to go back to what Dr. Mate said, first he acknowledges the other person's point of view. And he actually says this explicitly. He says, I understand your opinion. And if I recall correctly, he might even repeat this several times. The disagreement begins to escalate, and you can see the tempers beginning to get frayed. And Dr. Gabor continually says, listen, I understand your opinion. Then when it comes time to understanding what premises both sides agree on, because obviously they have some very big disagreements, Dr. Mate says, look, this, and this happened. We can both agree on that, right? So first, he tries to identify some kind of common ground. In this case, can we agree on at least 3 separate facts before we have our disagreement? This happened, and this happened. That is where we can at least draw common ground. Is that right? He then identifies points of disagreement. He points out a couple of these premises in the woman's argument and says, you say that this also happened. Now, I've looked at the evidence, and objectively, that did not happen. We cannot agree on that point. So he's switching from describing the common ground to identifying specific points of disagreement. What are premises that she uses which he cannot accept? And then the back and forth between the two people begins to escalate a little bit. And he says, look, I don't want to start a political rant. So let's take your question. How do we have compassion for these, quote, animals? So by doing this, he's trying to keep the conversation on track and not get into a discussion on politics. Instead, he says, listen, your original question was the behavior of these people is so inhumane, it can be compared to animals. So let's look at your question. Is it possible to have compassion for these animals? And he uses the word animals in order to show that he's using her term. He's not putting words in her mouth. No equivocation in this case. So then he also tries to show some kind of empathy. He says, listen, if I saw the world as you see it, I would agree with you 100%. And this is a point which I think is actually worth repeating. If I saw the world as you see it, I would agree with you 100%. If you have a disagreement with somebody and the temperature is rising and people are starting to get angry, it's worth wondering if you saw the world as the other person did, would your opinion change? And I think in many cases, we have to accept that our worldview really does influence how we form our opinions. And if you saw the world in a different way, you could possibly come to a very different conclusion. The premises which you accept as reliable can shape your reality to a great degree. Dr. Maté then provides some evidence. He says, I've talked to people there, and this has also been documented by independent informed sources like A, B, and C. He does list a couple of different sources which would seem to have no vested interest in lying or misrepresenting the material that he quotes. And he also tries to focus on understanding. He actually points out that he used to have a very similar opinion to the woman in the audience. He said, I used to see things the way that you do, but I don't do that anymore. I have a different view of the history. And I think this is also a very special thing that he does. He points out that although they have a disagreement now on basic premises, this is not something which has always been the case. As a matter of fact, he used to have opinions very similar to this woman, but now that he has a different view of history, that has changed his basic premises and therefore changed what he can accept and what he cannot. And he finishes off by making an analogy. He says here, the average North American knows nothing about the genocide of the indigenous peoples in their country. Do you think that the average Jew knows anything about the indigenous people of Palestine? And I think for me, as a North American myself, who grew up with very little knowledge of the suffering of the indigenous people of the country that I called home, I thought that was a very, very astute analogy to make. Now, once again, if you watch the video clip, you may identify more with the woman in the audience, or you may identify more with Dr. Maté. But I think the important thing here, regardless of your opinion on this issue, is how Dr. Mate approaches it and the techniques that he uses in order to try and diffuse some of the tension in the room, and also his way of trying to extend empathy to the other person. So give that a watch if you're interested. I've watched the video a few times, and I have to say, I can imagine how uncomfortable it must have felt for many people in the audience, but also how impressive it was to see how someone on a stage could respond to someone who has such a passionate but diametrically opposed opinion to himself. Okay, now that I've finished that, and actually I think I probably stretched that out longer than I should have. Now let's have a quick review of some of the key concepts in this course, just to see how we've come from point A to point Z. So if you go back to the beginning of the course in March, I started off with 6 different general rules for short arguments, resolving premise and conclusion. So knowing what the point is that you actually want to make and having clearly defined reasons for that, your premises. If you want to have an effective argument, there's a very great importance in unfolding your ideas in a natural order. I mean, do you want to put your conclusion out right at the very beginning and then have your premises after? Or do you want to have your premises build on each other, having a person accept them one by one before delivering them to a conclusion, which hopefully you have made them follow? Or do you want to try something slightly different? Each argument will be different, but the important thing is an argument can become more or less effective depending on the order in which you unfold your ideas. And some are just much more effective than others. When you create an argument, it's important to start from reliable premises. And as the example that I just showed in the first part of my lecture proves, there are many cases in the modern world where people will have a great deal of difficulty accepting a series of premises on both sides. So people will often disagree on even the most basic of premises, which is why when you stand in front of an audience, one thing that you need to keep in mind is, what do I consider reliable premises, and what will the other side, or the audience, what will they accept? Do we have a consensus on what actually is a reliable premise? Next, to be concrete and concise. Don't waste people's time. Don't have too many long sentences, or try not to be too verbose. Just be as concrete and concise and make it as easy to understand as possible, because that is one of the first steps to having a successful argument. If people get bored and get turned off because you're taking too long, then that can hurt the effectiveness of your argument. Next, to build on substance, not overtone. So try to use, good examples, wonderful sources, deductive arguments, statistics that are accurate, rather than using just loaded language. And finally, to use consistent terms, because this just makes your argument easier to understand. Later on in the course, we took a look at how to make arguments by using an example. So you might use an example if you're trying to show an illustration. Actually, I'll give one more example here very quickly. This one is also from Dr. Gabor Mate. There was another presentation of his that I was watching where he begins his speech by talking about Adolf Eichmann, who was one of the chief architects of the Nazi final solution. And Adolf Eichmann, as I understand it, he was the one who he organized the logistics, the movement of the Jews across Europe to the death camps in the occupied territories. And I don't believe the Holocaust would have been possible on the scale that it happened if he had not been in charge of, organizing the train lines and deciding how many people could be moved per train carriage, et cetera, et cetera. After the war, he escaped to Argentina, where he was later caught by Israeli secret agents and then brought back to Israel to stand trial for crimes against humanity. Now, the interesting part of this is they had a number of psychiatrists examine him, and Dr. Geb Mate talks about this in the introduction to one of his presentations on the myth of normal. And he mentions that all of the psychologists and the psychiatrists that looked at Adolf Eichmann, they came to the most startling conclusion, and that was he was normal. This man who organized the systematic death of millions of people was not a psychopath. He was just a bureaucrat. The phrase, the banality of evil, I think, comes from this. And he makes a good point after describing this. He says, if somebody can be responsible for the death of millions of people, but by the standards of modern psychiatry, still be considered, average, not psychopathic, maybe being normal is not something that we should all aspire to. And then he begins his presentation. Now, that obviously was using an example as a very specific illustration of a point. That is, that being normal does not necessarily mean that one is a good person. And he uses this extreme example in order to illustrate his point. Now, if you want to use more examples in order to strengthen your argument, you need to use representative examples. If you're taking a look at a very wide group of people in order to demonstrate a point, you would need to have representatives of different types of that person or of that point in order to make it representative. And the larger the group of people or the larger the group of data that you are working with, the more examples you would need. We also looked at statistics and how they have to be looked at very carefully, because statistics often are used in a way which does not actually support the argument in the ways that we think they might be. Numbers can be used in a very misleading way. And it's also important to take a look at background rates. Think of the bullseye example, which I gave you. If somebody scores a bullseye when they shoot an arrow at a target, that doesn't necessarily mean they are skilled at archery unless you know what the background rates are. Did they shoot only once and then get a bullseye, or did they shoot 100 arrows and then get a single bullseye? Because those would be two very, very different things. And finally, number 11, it's important to reckon with counterexamples. We live in a world full of a world full of exceptions. And if you have any kind of a significant counterexample, it can be a good idea to use that as part of your argument, just so the other side doesn't say, well, what about this case where your rule doesn't work? Okay. And then, we looked at using relevantly similar examples when constructing an analogy. Went through that. Arguments from authority. We talked about citing sources, trying to make sure they're informed and impartial, cross-checking to see whether these people are part of a consensus or whether they are outliers. We looked at arguments about causes, so how to describe positive correlations, negative correlations, brainstorming explanations for possible cause-effect relationships, as well as other things. We also took a look at deductive arguments, everything from modus ponens straight through to disjunctive syllogisms and reductio ad absurdum. That was always a fun word to pronounce. Extended arguments. Okay, this is getting closer towards the end of the course now. So as we move from just having a short argument to maybe a longer piece of writing, so getting into full paragraphs, essays, longer presentations, starting out by exploring an issue, brainstorming nuanced perspectives, and then writing your ideas as arguments. So making a list of premises followed by the conclusion, and then taking those premises and conclusion and writing it into a coherent paragraph. Okay, and now we're getting close to where we are now in the course, talking about public debates. I talked about that actually just in our most recent class. So a couple of notes that I might not have mentioned, and this is quite important when we do our debate style activity in a couple weeks. When you have a debate, it's important to really listen to the other side. Of course, before the debate, you want to try and anticipate what the other side is going to say. What are the points that the other side will likely bring up? What are the most obvious arguments that they will use? But it's also important to try and listen to what they say. Number one, because you can hopefully find some kind of common ground that you can work from, but also if you can actually listen to what the other side is saying, it will be a lot easier to find weaknesses in their argument and try and find out what the flaw in their reasoning might be. This can also help you if you're trying to look for some sort of positive feeling that you can bring into the debate. Remember, rather than just focusing on what the problem is or maybe what the weakness is in the other person's argument, you can also try and offer something positive. For example, rather than looking at what the person is doing wrong, try to give a solution to a problem. I also talked about trying to work from common ground, which is something that I also discussed with Dr. Mate when he had his experience in the Q&A in his presentation. It's important to try and think of what we have in common with the other side. Now, in our class, we looked at, for example, the subway cars, where we had the subway with reserved seating for pregnant women. Now, people that believe that seat, the reserved seating for pregnant women, people who believe that those seats should be abolished, and people who believe they should be maintained, obviously have a very fundamental disagreement. But they also have some common ground. And I think it's important for each side to acknowledge that although they may have a strong disagreement, there's also a lot of common ground that they do share. Here I put, it's number 49, at least be civil. When you have any kind of disagreement, I think it's important not to insult the other side, because rather than lower the other person, I think it lowers you. It's a very low class thing to do. And I believe that it's something that we're starting to see much more commonly in public discourse the last 10 years or so. And I think that's a horrible tragedy. I think it's important to be polite to the other side, even when you strongly disagree with them. And I'm very scared for a society where being rude to somebody that you simply disagree with has become increasingly normalized. Finally, when you finish a presentation or any kind of debate, it's important to leave the other side, as well as the audience, thinking. People might actually remember that last thought, that last sentence, that last idea that you finished your presentation or your debate with. They might be going home on the subway or the bus, and then suddenly they're thinking, you know what? That last thing that person said, something about it just sticks in my mind and I can't get it out. And it can stay with the person and actually possibly change their thinking. The last thought that you offer in a presentation or the last words you say in a debate can sometimes be the most important ones. Okay. Last of all, we took a look at some common fallacies, and we had an in-class quiz on them. Now, for those students that really enjoyed that quiz, don't worry. We're not finished with common fallacies yet. I'm actually going to put a couple of common fallacies on the final exam, and I'll do something very similar to the quiz, where I will give you an example of a common fallacy, and you will need to identify what that fallacy is. Okay, So now the moment you've all been waiting for, you want to know what we're going to be doing for our final debate activity. Well, here is the plan. I am going to divide you into 4 groups, 1, 2, 3, 4. And in each group, there's going to be 2 subgroups. Okay, so we are going to have our debate activity on 2 separate days, on I think it's Tuesday the 10th and Tuesday the 12th of June. Now, when each group does their presentation, they've actually broken up into 2 subgroups. One group which will argue in favor of a proposal, and the other one which will argue against a proposal. So each side will explore a topic, brainstorm absolute and nuanced arguments, get to choose a position. The A and B version of each group will take opposing sides. So, yeah. All right. So moving on, here is the schedule. So on June the 5th, we're going to have some in-class preparation. That means you come to class and you can bring your laptops, you can bring your tablets. I will be in class, but I'm not really going to be doing anything except answering any questions you might have. So just you and your partners can be doing research and writing your presentation. Now, on June the 10th and June the 12th, we're going to have our debate style activity. And I think this would be the most effective way of doing it. In the past, I've tried to have more of a debate, like an actual debate with classes, and it hasn't worked out well. I want to have some of the basic structure of a debate here, but you'll see how it's slightly different. Essentially, a group will come up, and we'll have one person from each side, so the A person and the B person. The A person will come up and lead their argument, and then B will present their argument. So let's say, for example, if A comes up and says, cats are better than dogs, and then B will come up and say, well, dogs are better than cats. Each person will have a chance to present their argument. Then after A and B have both presented their argument, A will have a chance to either refute B's argument or ask a question to B. And then B will do the same. B will have a chance to either refute B's argument, meaning you said this, but what about that? Or I think this is a logical fallacy, or this is a weak point in your argument. So they'll have a chance to either refute it or ask the other person a particular question. I'm doing this because in the past, I think students found it hard to listen and with very little time to prepare, come up with a coherent question. So if you don't want to try to refute what the person said, but you just want to ask a question in order to get more information, that's also okay. After both A and B have had a couple of chances either to refute the other side's argument or ask the other side a question, then we will take some questions from the audience. And the audience will just say, I have a question for A, or I have a question for B, and both sides will have a chance to answer the questions from the audience. Then after that, the audience will have a chance to decide which of the subgroups' arguments they found to be more effective, and we'll have a little secret ballot where you can check which side you think is the more convincing, and then I'll be collecting that and share the results later. And then we will have our second group come up. And once again, the second group will have the A side and the B side, and then we'll do that again. I hope that each of these presentations will be at least half an hour. So that will give each of the groups, let's say 30 to 35 minutes in order to share both their arguments, ask each other questions, possibly refute the other's arguments, and also take questions from the audience, and then have a quick vote. We will repeat that same process on June the 12th. A group will come up, we'll hear from the A side and the B side. The A will have a chance to refute B's argument, or if they want to, they can ask a question. Then it'll be the other side's turn. If we have time, then they could even ask each other a second or third question. We'll see. It really does depend on how quickly the questions get answered. All right, so the grading itself, this is going to be worth 10% of your final grade. So you might want to start off with a little bit of background to the issue, maybe a short paragraph on that. You might want to include some spoken elements when you write it. I understand that you are actually writing the argument, but remember, you will be speaking it in front of the class. You might want to refer actually to the PPT or the lecture that I also posted on Cybercampus, where I give a couple of examples. In particular, the meteor that crashed in Mexico that killed the dinosaurs, or the theory that this particular meteor hit Mexico and then created a big dust cloud that killed the dinosaurs. I have both the original written argument as well as a spoken version of it, which has a few different rhetorical flourishes, as well as a couple of signposting examples. These sort of things make it much more engaging as a spoken argument. And you might want to include some of that just so it doesn't sound as dry. If you just simply read part of an argumentative essay, it does have a tendency to sound a little bit dry and academic. Don't be afraid to liven it up a little bit. Remember, you are speaking in front of a class, and the more effectively that you can communicate your argument, the more likely that the class will find it more convincing. It's also important to give us at least 3 premises in order to support your conclusion. And each of your 3 premises, and remember, you want to be able to summarize these premises in a short, concrete, clear, and concise sentence. I want you to support each one. Each premise you have that should support your argument should be backed up with something. Now, you might want to give me an example or two. Or maybe if you think that your premise could be strengthened by making an analogy, this would make it easier for people to understand, then maybe tell us your premise and then compare it to a similar situation. Perhaps an analogy would actually be a very good way of supporting a premise. Or maybe you want to use a deductive argument. I would like you to use something for each of your premises. So maybe one premise you might want to back up with an example or a statistic. Another premise, you might want to use an analogy to help us understand more deeply. Another one, you might want to use a deductive argument. It's up to you, but I want you to have one type of information for each. I don't want you to have premise 1 plus an analogy, premise 2 plus an analogy, premise 3 plus an analogy. Use a variety of techniques in order to support each of your premises. Also, I would like you to briefly mention possibly the strongest argument that you think the other side is going to make, and then tell me why it's not a very strong argument. Perhaps there's a logical flaw, or perhaps you can evaluate it and say, this counter argument does make a point. However, there's a reason why our opinion is the stronger preferred opinion. And then include a brief concluding statement. Okay. So the written argument there, that's going to be worth 10%. Speaking, yeah, that's going to also be 5%. Each person, by the way, should choose a role. I'm thinking if we've got about 3 people in each group, so let's say, for example, A side has 3 people, B side has 3 people. Each person should choose a role. So, for example, one person might deliver the the initial argument where they have the couple of paragraphs where they tell us the background, give us the premises, and then their conclusion, mention the counter argument and refutation, brief concluding statement. And then another person that might be responsible for asking questions to the other side or responding to the questions that the other side gives them. And another person might be responsible for answering questions from the audience. I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak at some point during this presentation. The PowerPoint itself should be about 5%, and I don't want very much for the PowerPoint. All you really need is a short PowerPoint for your opening statement, where you're going to give us background, give us your premises, along with their, example, analogy, deductive argument, or statistic, etc. A few key visuals, maybe a slide or two that actually show your main premises, something like that, just to bring your argument to life. A very minimalist style PPT is all I'm really expecting from students. Okay, and yeah, when you deliver the speech itself, obviously you're going to upload a version or upload a typed version of your argument. But when you actually deliver it, you don't need to deliver it word for word. And this is because I don't want students to stand with a paper in front of their face and then be reading from it in a monotone voice. As long as you get the main ideas out and you have the energy and enthusiasm and you try to connect with the audience, that's what's important. I'm looking for clarity. I'm not looking for people that are just going to be reading from the page. If all you can do is read from a script, it's not going to be very convincing for the audience. If there's one thing I might want to point out, is that sometimes a pause is what makes all the difference between someone really getting your point and not getting it. When you give an argument, when you present something to either the class or another group, just think to yourself, I don't need to speak continuously, especially after I've made an important point, or if I've just asked a rhetorical question. What could be more important than that? And then continue. If you speak continuously without a pause, it doesn't give the audience time to digest what it is you're saying and understand the importance of it. Sometimes slowing down a sentence while you're speaking, giving a short pause, taking a short pause, after making an important point and actually looking at the audience, these are the things which can make a presentation that much more effective. Okay, and I think we're getting quite close. So here's what I'm going to do very, very soon. I will be posting in the next day or so the 6 different groups, the 4 different groups. Why did I say 6 different groups? The 4 different groups, and so you'll get to know who your partners are. I think it's a good idea if you make a little Kakao chat room where you can get together. And then I would like you to decide who is going to be in the A group and who is going to be in the B group, because you're going to choose a topic and I will let you choose the topic. I'm not going to give any advice on that. Of course, if you don't have any ideas, I can always give you a couple of suggestions. But you and your partners will have to decide who will be in the A side and who will be in the B side. A will be arguing in favor of something, and the B side will be obviously taking the opposite conclusion. So A side will be on one side, B side will be on the other. I will let you decide who will be in the A and the B. Organize your argument in premise and conclusion form. Of course, you'll have to have a short introductory paragraph where you give us a little bit of background to the conclusion as well. Don't forget also to have a short counter argument and briefly refute that as well. I'm not looking for too much here because I'd like you to have a limit of only 500 to 600 words. In past classes, I've asked students to write longer essays. And unfortunately, what happened in that case, or those cases, was so much time was actually spent reading that there was very little time for the representatives from both sides of the issue to talk with each other and also take questions from the audience. And I want to maximize the amount of time that students can talk to somebody from the other side and also take questions from the audience. I want to make this as interactive as possible. So describe the issue, present your opinion with 3 good premises backed up with an example, analogy, statistic, deductive argument, etc. Refute a counter argument relatively briefly, and then give us a short conclusion with maybe a final thought, and then that's it. 500 to 600 words, please don't go over that. And remember, once again, when you do your presentation, the person who's going to deliver this speech, they don't need to follow it exactly word for word. Yes, you will upload your script, but I'm looking for engagement with the audience. So if you go off script a little bit, but you're able to get the ideas across and you don't forget what the analogy or the example or the statistic is, I don't mind if you go off the script a little bit. Okay, so I think that's all that I've got for now. So putting it all together, all right, yeah, start from reliable premises. I've mentioned this 100 times, and I think everybody has the point now. When you and the people on your side, whether this is the A side or the B side, decide on your perspectives, you have to start from reliable premises. Unfold your ideas in natural order. Make sure you're using concrete terms. Address counterexamples. You might want to do that, although once again, you've only got 500 or 600 words. If you don't, it's okay. But I would like you to cite at least one source, try to use at least one deductive argument, maybe use an analogy. Remember, your premises will need to be backed up. And I think the different techniques that I've given you, for example, using a good analogy and showing us how something is like something else, or using representative examples, quoting an informed, impartial source that has done relatively recent research, something like that can really help strengthen your argument. Okay, so the details, yeah, I would like everybody, whether you are in group 1, 2, 3, or 4, to make sure that your script and PPT are completed and uploaded to Yarlin Geshipan on Cyber Campus by 11:59 p.m. on Monday, June the 9th. Now, 2 groups will be going, group 1 and group 2, will be going on June the 10th. However, I don't want groups 3 and 4 to have extra time to prepare. So I really would like all groups and all sides, both A and B, to upload their presentation, the PPT and the script, to Cyber Campus by 11:59 p.m. on Monday. That makes it fair for everybody. Make sure you include the date, all the members' names in English, student numbers, of course. The name of your file, please use MS Word. Call it LCU 4004 dash, actually, I think we're section 3, not section 1. So LCU 4004-3, and then tell me like group 1, group 2, group 3, or 4, and then if you're A or B. So like group 1A, group 1B, group 2A, group 2B, etc. All right, and I think we are just about here. Yeah, after you finish, yeah, the audience will have a chance to vote and choose which side argued more effectively. And now just a quick preview of the final exam. So this is going to be in 4 parts. We'll be looking at extended arguments, argumentative essays, public debates, and fallacies. So if you haven't had enough of the different logical fallacies that we checked out earlier in the course, don't worry, there's a little bit here on the exam too. So part one, extended arguments. This is going to be 5 points. I will give you a couple of options from a list, and I want you to choose one. And I would like you to identify 3 positions on a topic. Remember, we talked about having like nuanced positions, coming up with exceptions, like should university students have to take a cooking class? You know, you might argue that university students shouldn't have to take a cooking class unless they're in certain majors, or university students should have to take a cooking class unless they can prove that they can cook a certain number of dishes. Whatever it is, I'm looking for you to brainstorm 3 nuanced positions on a topic. So to be able to see that things are not always 100% one or the other, that there are arguments you can make that include some kind of exceptions. I'll ask you to list 3 premises in support of one of your positions, possibly describe a counter argument, and then give a legitimate reason why that counter argument should not be accepted. Okay, next, part 2, argumentative essays. One thing, I don't think I went into too much detail here, but I think this is definitely worth practicing. So one thing that often comes up when students create their thesis statement for a persuasive speech or in a debate is they might have an argument that is very generalized. For example, they might say, you know, the government should do something. And I've actually had students do presentations where they say, I don't know, the internet should be regulated, something like that. But, well, should the government regulate the internet? Well, which government, and regulate it how? What particular law? Regulate it for everybody? Regulate certain websites? Regulate certain demographic or certain age groups? So I will give you a couple of very general arguments. You know, fast food is unhealthy, for example, or ChatGPT is bad for students, something like that. And what I would like you to do is take the generic argument and make it specific. So take something that is very vague and in your own way, make it into a much tighter, much more specific conclusion. Give me 3 premises that would support that conclusion, describe a counter argument, and then once again, explain what is wrong or weak in the counter argument. This is very similar to what you've done previously in part 1. Basically, this is all the same sort of argumentative style writing that we looked at in class. I'm just asking you to provide frameworks in 2 different cases. In part 1, you will be brainstorming nuanced positions, choosing one of those, supporting it with 3 premises, describing a counter argument, and then trying to refute it. And then in part 2, I'll give you a generic argument, a very vague statement. You will make it more specific, give me 3 premises, describe a counter argument, and tell me what's wrong with it. So very similar. And then, here we go, the public debates. I will ask you to read an argument and then rewrite it in premise and conclusion form. I want to see that you actually understand what the argument is, even if you disagree with it. This is very similar to what we looked at in class the other day, where I showed you some quotes from Mahatma Gandhi, Muhammad Ali, and President Trump, where you may agree or you may disagree with what the person actually said. But what I'm more interested in is, do you actually understand the argument that the person is trying to make? Because sometimes when people make arguments, they can be a little indirect. They can be a little bit vague. There can be some room for interpretation. I want you to show that you can understand what the argument is that's being made. even if you disagree with it. So if you encounter a quote which you think, oh, I think that's completely wrong for a particular reason, that's fine if you disagree with it. But I want you to show me that you know what you're disagreeing with. Second, yet identifying common ground in two opposing positions. We looked at that actually in our last class. So I will give you two quotes. So you'll get to see quote A and quote B, and they will have diametrically opposed opinions on a topic. And I would like you to try and list common ground, probably 3 sentences, 3 examples of common ground that these two people would share, even though they have a very strong disagreement on on the issue. What are 3 things that they would still be able to find common ground with? Okay. And then finally, part 4, just identify fallacies and fallacious arguments. This will be very, very similar to what you had in the quiz earlier in the course. I will give you a list of logical fallacies, the same 8 or 9 that we looked at earlier on. And then all you need to do is read it and then identify which fallacy is being used in which argument. And that'll be it. The final exam will be done on paper, so you will need to bring a pen or pencil and eraser. This is because in a couple of my classes, we had problems with the internet signal on Cyber Campus during the exam, which caused some students to have some of their answers erased. So don't want that to happen on the final exam. So we're going old school, pen and paper. I will give you a paper copy of the exam, and you will simply write the answers. If your handwriting is a little bit messy, that's fine, but please try to make it as legible as possible. If you have to scratch out a line or reorganize your information, that's okay. I can also give you some spare paper, some blank paper, if you want to write your notes on it before you write down your final answer on the paper. You can also do that. All right, so a couple of final thoughts. Yeah, when we do get back together on June the 5th, it's just going to be for preparation for the presentations. And then after that, we've got our presentations and then the final exam. So I don't have a lot of time to actually give much more lecture-based material. So I just want to give you a final thought, and that's that critical thinking is not only for the classroom. I like to believe that a lot of what I'm showing you in this course has a place outside the classroom. If the example that I gave at the beginning of this lecture with Dr. Mate and the Q&A incident is just one example, we live in a world where you will encounter many different arguments. Sometimes they're visual, sometimes they're spoken, sometimes it'll be something you read. You might have an argument with someone in your family or a friend, a classmate, or someone that you might not even know if you're communicating on social media. When you study critical thinking, it's important not only to watch out for certain errors in the logical thinking of others, but also to be very conscious of what thought processes are underlying your own premises and conclusions. And this isn't just something that you learn and then you go on to something else. This is something that you will be relearning and hopefully learning more deeply throughout your life. And it's something which I am still learning even now. And I think actually teaching this course is helping me to become a better critical thinker. All right, so I think I've talked for long enough. Hopefully you're still awake and haven't fallen asleep at some point throughout this lecture. I will see you back in class on June the 5th. In the next day or so, what I will do is post on KakaoWork the people that I would put into the 4 separate groups. I was hoping to do this actually before the end of our last class, but I didn't have the chance to do so. So I'll just take a look at the attendance sheet, close my eyes, randomly point at different names, make a list of 4 different groups, and then I'll post those into the group chat on KakaoWork. in a day or so. And then after that, you can get together in your groups and I'll let you choose something that you should continue thinking about. Usually I'm quite open-minded, so I accept most options, but please run your idea past me before you actually start preparing. So with your partners, choose a topic and then it should be a specific topic where there's very clearly two diametrically opposed opinions. Send me a message. I will approve it. And then you guys can divide yourselves into your A and B group, however you want. Class on June the 5th, ready to begin preparing for your presentation. Okay. And all right, now my computer hopefully has not frozen on me here.